Hi there. Hi guys. How you doing? It's Igor here. Um, Happy Friday. Hopefully you guys are looking forward to spend wonderful time and wonderful weekend. Weekend is just around the corner, right? So really quickly, I'm actually gonna try to generate multiple videos, record different sessions where we're gonna tackle service networking and how Infoblox can help you out with that as well. But um, but right now the focus is going to be on if I go back here, the focus is going to be in this just phase one, just to set the stage. So we've been working with a lot of customers, and in this particular case, uh, let's call it customer A, where the customer has a footprint that was kind of span across different regions, different clouds. It was a really kind of complex environment with customer being using SD-WAN to connect different regions, different cloud service providers. They've been using the cloud native constructs as well. They built their application in microservices fashion, and they've been using a lot of PaaS services as well. It was really kind of complex in a way that they had to set up the full-blown routing, and then they couldn't address in a kind of intelligent and easy way service to service communication. In this particular case, the customer on the bottom, you're going to see the customer been using their applications in a fashion of microservices. They had API gateway, the REST API gateway that was private, only accessible inside the VPC. That shield actually the backend, that was a Lambda function calling out the DynamoDB, again using the VPC endpoints and gateways and trying to connect that keep communication private inside the AWS infrastructure, right? So the traffic didn't they didn't want that traffic to travel across any public links or any wide area networking, whether it's a private or public overlays, right? So you're gonna see here that if I go back and we try to mimic here. Obviously, this is not the mimic of the entire customer environment, but I'm just gonna give you a gist what's happening. Basically, if I go here and go to the API gateway, the customer actually had API gateway, the custom domain names. In this case, in this first phase, we're gonna put that aside, but we're gonna add ACM and custom domains and DNS servers. In this case, the Infoblox DNS service and Infoblox UDDI. How we can control and manipulate the traffic steering using relying on the DNS, not on the IP destination routing and route table lookups. So basically, you're gonna see here that the customer actually had API gateway that was listening and accepting only the post request or the post HTTP method. The invoke URL, in this case, it was like FQDM was related to the AWS, but obviously the customer has been using the custom domains, using the CNAMEs, et cetera, et cetera. We're gonna integrate that a little bit later. But right now, we're just going to focus on, domains that are generated and URLs that are generated by AWS, right? So what we are trying to do, we are trying to simplify that for the customer. We are trying to simplify that in a way that, we're going to eliminate the transit gateways, the transit gateway attachments. We're going to try to remove the route table manipulation that needs to be updated, the route need to be propagated, how many prefixes the route table can handle, what about, using overlays to mitigate that? Can I put virtual router there? Like all that kind of traditional way of solving connectivity inside the cloud really works to the certain extent, and then after that it doesn't make any sense because it doesn't understand the world around it, right? The world of service networking, the world of the PaaS services, and so on, right? So what you're gonna see here on the right hand side, actually, we're gonna have the source app that there is a requirement that that app, the Flask app here that you see, needs to talk to the backend, and the backend is actually the microservices architecture, where you have the Lambda function that is invoked inside the VPC2 using the VPC endpoint to access the Amazon DynamoDB as a platform as a service, right? So everything stays inside a VPC, and we don't need to do any kind of VPC peerings. We are not trying to connect VPC1 with VPC2 and exchange the siders or anything like that. We're just going to focus, can I connect the service A to service B, more or less, right? And the AWS Lattice is actually exactly what you would expect to have, in the sense of, I need a solution that is going to help me to address the service networking, right? So basically, if I go back to my console, I'm going to show you, or as a matter of fact, let's go to the CLI, right? So basically, if I go Terraform output here, let's make this a little bit bigger. All right. So here, if I go Terraform output to check what's been, let's move my video over there, right? So you're going to see here, we're going to have 3 VPCs, the Prod EU1, Prod EU2, Prod EU3, right? So basically, if I go back here, let me go to console as well, so we can follow the entire infrastructure, right? So basically, you're gonna see these 3 VPCs. If I check the route tables of it in the past, like I said, let's check the IP table of VPC IP table for VPC1. You're going to see here, obviously, it's a little bit small now, but like you can imagine, if we had multiple things that the customer has, but you're going to see here, the transit gateway attachments go to the transit gateway route tables. We are trying to use the cloud native networking and security constructs in order to be able to connect different regions. The customer has been using that in addition to utilizing third parties as the SD-WAN vendors. What we have done, right? We have eliminated the need for it. And then we try to introduce VPC Lattice. You're going to see here the ranges are actually that are kind of assigned to the VPC Lattice service, right? So if I go here, you're going to see that we created VPC Lattice. If I go back here, you're going to see the service network that been created. And you're going to see the associations, right? So what we are doing, we are trying to do the VPC association in this case, and then we're going to do the service association, right? Which means that in the VPC associations, you're going to see that, we actually associated 2 VPCs. In this case, we really don't need to have the VPC2, right? So it's not necessary because the VPC2 is actually done with the service association, right? So if I go back to the VPCs, you're gonna see here that for VPC1 I have 0E, 2 last digits of my VPC ID. So if I go to service networks, you're gonna see that I have 1 second, 0E. If I go back to the service network, you're going to see 0E is associated here. For the service association, you're going to see that, I did association of the Lambda function. And if I go to the customer API service, and then to service network association, you're gonna see that association here, right? If I go to the target groups, you're gonna see here that I created actually the target group here, that it's actually related and associated in backend with the Lambda function. So now if I go to the to service, and then if I go here To routing, you're gonna see that we also create a listener, right? The listener is gonna have one rule that we need to mimic and keep the things aligned. So if I go back here to the bottom, what the customer had, they had the API gateway that was the REST API gateway, and it used actually the path prod / invoke, which means this is what we are expecting to see. And this is obviously what Lambda is expecting to see as well. So what we did, we actually tried to mimic that as well, right? So in the listening rules, if I go edit here, you're gonna see that I have a Lambda here. If I edit, you're gonna see here that we created the rule with the priority that to be low, right? But in this case, I don't have many rules, so it really doesn't matter. But so if you have multiple rules, you can leave the gaps in priority numbers, right? But in this case, we're just gonna focus on a single rule. We're gonna do the matching condition that it's gonna be HTTP post, right? And then we're gonna try to match the path condition, right? And then obviously, based on that, what's gonna be the action, we're gonna forward that to the target group that was defined as the Lambda function, right? Fantastic. So in this case, what we are doing, we are also trying to help customers to eliminate API gateway. The Lambda function can stay the same, right? So with this, we are actually keeping the Lambda function to be the same code. You don't need to change anything, and then we're gonna try to push traffic to go to the obviously the Amazon VPC Lattice. Always when you create the service, right, you need to keep in mind that in this lab, let me show you that, right? If I go to the service, right, you're gonna see the domain here, right? So let me go back here, right? So you're gonna see that FQDN is actually the FQDN that you're gonna get from AWS, right? But if you're using a custom domain and the customer is doing that, we're gonna change that, right? So in the next iteration of this video, when you create a service, right, you're gonna be able to see here on the domain configuration, right, that you can use the custom domain. Now, when you're using a custom domain for your setup, you need to make sure that you have your certificate either imported or accessible in ACM, right? Because you're not going to be able to insert any kind of certificates that are outside of the Amazon ACM service, right? So you can see here that, right, you need to have that either created in ACM or imported in ACM, and then it's going to be visible here, right? You cannot change the domain configuration, if you created, use generated domain and then moving to the custom domains, right? So in this case, we're gonna stick to the custom or actually AWS generated domain. Obviously, I'm gonna show you the code a little bit of the Flask app, right? So so if I go a second. If I go here, all right, you're gonna see here that we package. Obviously, we package the Flask app inside the Docker, and we, put that Docker on EC2 instance. And you're gonna see here that I have a route in Flask app that actually is fetching the in the past, it was the API gateway URL, but we're trying to change the code a little bit. So now I'm gonna try to go directly and utilize the VPC Lattice endpoint, more or less, right? So you're gonna see that FQDN that I'm using that is hard coded, but initially we're gonna have the customer is gonna have the FQDN that sits in their custom domain. So we're gonna talk about that. But let me explain you how it works, right? And now if I go to my Flask app, you're gonna see this is the landing page, right? So we're gonna try to simulate and generate some traffic. and try to simulate how the source app, the front end, needs to communicate, interact with a with a target or destination application, the pass kind of service in this case, right? So so what you're gonna see here is that, so let me go back and jump to the EC2 instance where I have a Flask app, right? So if I go back here, right, to make this a little bit bigger. All right, so I need to jump to the prod EU1, right? This is my VPC1 based on the diagram here, right? So I'm gonna go to my VPC1 and jump on a EC2 instance where I have a Flask app deployed, right? So if I go back here and try to access it, you're gonna see that I'm there, right? And I have the IP 1020.0.100, right? So now, if I try to see what my Flask app is gonna do, my Flask app is gonna try to, if I go back to my code right here, you're gonna see that I'm using Python request packages. And then I'm gonna try actually to reach out API gateway URL, right? So now if I'm accessing my application, my source application needs to access the destination application, I need to get that URL resolved, right? So basically, if I do dig here and I try to resolve the customer slash API service, the VPC Lattice service that I created, that I'm using to present my destination application, you're going to see here that I'm actually sitting inside the range of 169.254.171.0/24, right? So if I go back here, right, and then this is going to be my default gateway, right? So where my source application in this case, my Flask app, right? It's not here, it's on CloudShare, right? Try to use the request packages, right? And try to make HTTP post requests, right? Before that, we need to know where we're going to send that packet, right? So we're going to need to resolve that URL. In this case, it's going to be Amazon control URL, more or less, but we're going to show you how using the aliases and using Infoblox, we can control how packets are routed in VPC1 using the DNS, the private hosted zones, right? So in this case, I need to go here, right? So if I go back to my AWS and the route tables, you're going to see here that in prod EU1, if I go to routes, you're going to see that I have that prefix there, right? So whatever IP I need to use in that range, right? I'm gonna send that to the VPC Lattice, right? So I can have /24, I can have something bigger, wider, right? And then I can present my target applications with these IPs. It really doesn't matter what is the real IP of the target, right? I know that I'm always going to go to the VPC Lattice. So in that sense, in this case, we are talking about the PaaS services, the Lambda and so on. But like, even if you have some applications that are sitting on EC2 instance, right? Then if you think about it, you know, you really don't care about the target or destination application IP, because you're always going to go to the VPC Lattice that it's going to front end your target application. So in that sense, you know, the routing is based on FQDN. You really don't care about IPs. So in certain way, the overlapping IPs can be also addressed in certain scenarios, of course, right? So now, if I go back here and I try, and I'll let this show you DynamoDB, right? Just for the simulation, right? So we have here, we have a table that creates the customer data, and then we have only, you know, one entries. So if I check here, a second. So if I go to explore items, you're gonna see that I have one-on-one, right? You're gonna say I have some kind of data there just to simulate something, right? So basically, and then of course, let me show you the endpoints, right? Just to make sure that you are following. If I go to the endpoint services, you're gonna see here that that we actually created the gateway for DynamoDB, right? That is associated with the correct VPC route table, and then Lambda, when Lambda actually gets inside the VPC, right, then it's going to call the DynamoDB. So that communication stays inside the VPC privately, right, utilizing AWS infrastructure. So basically, if I go here and then I try to query and use the key, which is going to be the customer ID, right? So if I go to DynamoDB and explore items, customer data. So I'm using the customer ID here as the key for searching, right? So if I go back here, I'm going to show you, yeah, let's go to the Lambda function just to show you really simple Lambda function that is doing its thing, right? So if I go to the demo test, you're going to see that my Lambda function initially was associated with API gateway, but now it's with VPC Lattice, right? And I'm using both O3 to interact with the DynamoDB, and I'm using the customer ID here, right? To try to query, to make queries to the DynamoDB, right? So if I go here and try to use the customer ID, which is 1001 in this case. So if we go explore items, right, you're going to see here the customer ID 1001, right? And I get customer info. You're going to see here that I'm getting the data from the DynamoDB. Now, you can, let's try to go to the CloudWatch and check what we can see there, right? So if I go to the log groups here, I created just like one log group there, right? And then if you go here, let's see now, the time is 10:03. So let me see. All right. Here we go. So you're going to see here that 10:03, obviously there is a time difference, right? This is 8:02, right? So it's the same time there because this is the UTC time zone in long. So what you're going to see here, right? You're going to see actually all the data that are showing you that we are using the VPC Lattice. You're also going to see the user agent here, right? So if I'm using the Python request library, right, in this case, my Flask app is using that in the backend. There is a backend logic here that I showed you, right? That it's fetching the customer data, right? And you're gonna see here also you're gonna be able to see if I go back here and try to see the logs here as well. 1 second. You're gonna see here. So if I go, let me try to filter this, right? So what we are trying to do, give me 1 second. So if I go and do dig here, right? So this is the IP that we are communicating with, right? So now if I want to check the VPC flow logs, right, I can try to sort it out here. And then you're going to be able to see based on the timestamp as well that we are actually communicating, right? So 10, 20, 0, 100 is communicating with that VPC Lattice IP, right? So we are really not relying on any kind of, IP routing. What is the target or what's the destination IP, and trying to associate that with the trust gateway attachments, propagation of the routes, etc., etc., etc. Right? We are trying to do this really intelligently, right? All right. So basically, what we're going to show next, right? When we expand the story, you're going to see that, how we can control and apply different service policies here. And, obviously how we can associate the cloud DNS to each one of these VPCs, create the private hosted zones, and try to manipulate the routing, how the routing goes. And this is where Infoblox is going to jump in as well, because now the Flask app that is sitting here, it's always going to try to access the target application that is going to be presented by the VPC Lattice. So whenever you try to do the DNS resolution, the DNS is going to tell you where you need to go, right? So you really don't care what is the default route in the route table of the source VPC or source VNet, et cetera, right? It's always going to be the same kind of endpoint, and then these association that you are doing, it can be networking focus, where you are focused on VPC association and apply different authentication policies, or it can be the service policy. In this case, the service association. So in this case, we are just strictly focusing on the Lambda as a target, using Lambda as a target group, right? But it can be any kind of instance or IP address or any kind of service that is aligned with what is supported by the VPC Lattice at this moment, right? But essentially the goal is that you really don't care, is it the Lambda, is it S3 bucket, is this RDS or not, right? What you want to do is that I want to connect the service A in service B, and I want to do it in a way that I really don't care about IPs. I really don't care. I don't want to have a full-blown routing in place with all the tunnels, BGP on top of that, exchanging routes. Can I do it in a different way? And then automatically, partially, I can address also the overlapping IPs, right? Because in the cloud, it's always about this FQDN needs to talk to FQDN to FQDN B, and the DNS is the tool and the feature that's going to give you that visibility, but also is going to give you protection, and it's going to give you a ways to manipulate and control how the traffic goes, no matter what route table is telling you to do, right? So you can see here in this particular case, even though I didn't remove that yet, right? So if I go to the VPC and I check the route table, right, you're going to see here that, I have a default route. Even if I had like a specific route for the target, or destination VPC, right? I wouldn't go to the transit gateway. I wouldn't go to that route, right? I would follow actually the only route that I need, and that route is actually send everything to the VPC Lattice, right? In this case, you can think about that. Maybe you can have VPC or private link that is sitting there, right? That is going to be a representation of your target application. So if the private link is sitting there, you drop the endpoint in the source VPC, right? You're good to go. So all the traffic is going to go to that endpoint, no matter what is the IP, the real IP of the target application. So we're going to talk about that a little bit later, but yeah, I just wanted to do like really quick demo for VPC Lattice. So this story is going to evolve, but I didn't have much time to do anything else, right? So did this recording in last 30 minutes. So hopefully you're gonna find it interesting, and then stay tuned, guys. We're gonna have some fun. Have a great weekend. Cheers.